Let's see. If somebody said that I have a lot of noise in my mic setup, is that? Do you have a lot of noise from me, Yaron?
No, it's good now.
It's good now. All right. Yeah, I was.
But but then, just as you said, it's good that I heard that motor noise again.
Ah. All right. I may need to. Need to switch. Need to switch computers. So we'll see how that works. I'll work on that while we start.
Okay, let's take one more minute. People are still joining.
So Yaron, how is this volume, or how is this audio? Is that better for me?
Yes. No. Buzzing again.
Plus,
Yeah,
maybe you're
I'm gonna
using
have
your
to
system microphone rather than the headset.
drop and rejoin, I think.
Okay, I guess we can get started as we're waiting for Leaf to rejoin. So welcome everyone. It's 12 noon in Bangkok for those of you in Bangkok. I'm Yaron Scheffer and Leif will be joining us in a minute.
I'm right here, thank you.
Hi Leif. This is the note well. It applies to virtual meetings just as much as it applies to face-to-face meetings. If you have not read it yet, please take a minute to read it in the meeting materials. And a few things that may be new if it's the first virtual IETF you're joining. So we're now doing video at the IETF unless you are presenting or even if you are making a comment to the mic, please turn on your video. Otherwise, please have your video off. Obviously, mute your microphone and use reasonable audio equipment. We're not doing blue sheets. These are taken automatically and there's no special need to use Jabber clients. Those are the same chat rooms as you see in Meteco. And here you can see where to go to if there are technical issues. So no blue sheets. There will be minutes on CodeMD, the collaborative markdown solution that ITF is using. We do need a minute taker. In fact, we cannot continue the meeting unless we have a minute taker. So if you can take it on, please go on the mic and tell us, please. Any volunteers for minute takers, please?
Feel free to just mention it in chat if you're willing. I understand that this is a bad time of the day to be asking favors, but
yeah.
Dave, are you about to volunteer?
Yeah, I can volunteer.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we basically will not be looking at chat. So if you want to jump into the meeting, please raise your hand in the application. Leaf will be managing the queue, and we will call you in into the audio stream as soon as possible. So no chat. Please use the raise hand tool. The agenda for today, and please let us know if you have any comments. We will start with a process discussion, which we're going to cap by 20 minutes. Then we will spend the bulk of the meeting on the core protocol. The editors will present the progress so far and will present specific issues that either need more discussion and or can be closed today. Obviously with follow-up on the mailing list. And then we will say a few words about next steps, all in the next 2 hours. Any comments or questions to the agenda? All right. So next into the process discussion. So I need to reshare my screen. All right. So where we're coming from, all decisions about the protocol and all decisions about process are the responsibility of the working group as a whole. The chairs are only there to call consensus on the working group. And the main tool that the working group uses to make decisions and to come to consensus is the mailing list. However, many people prefer to use GitHub. It's a very efficient tool for threading issues, for example, and for tracking progress on different things, and obviously for managing the document itself. So there are 2 RFCs about the use of GitHub in the IETF. and those will be guiding us, with the goal being to have maximum transparency, or in other words, more discussion that's available for everybody to look at, and less discussion privately between the editors and the chairs. So as much transparency as we can. For many years, we have managed documents on GitHub. So I think most ITF participants are used to it. Issue management is more interesting, more recent, and needs a bit more clarification, and that's what we're going to do here. So it was clear from the mailing list that people prefer to manage issues for this working group on GitHub. So here's the proposal, and starting from the document itself. Today we have only one document, the core protocol. Over time we will have more. So if you have small editorial edits, small comments that do not change the meaning of the document, you're welcome to just open a pull request for that, and the editors will merge it into the document. Either editors or maybe other people over time, but starting with editors now, will be opening pull requests for all bigger changes, and those pull requests should reference a GitHub issue that they're resolving. This means that we have a review process. Again, it's the primary responsibility of the editors, but the editors are welcome to publicize pull requests on the list and ask for additional reviewers for pull requests. We are asking the editors to publish at least once per ITF period, so per 4 months. But it's easy enough to publish a new revision of an internet draft. So please also republish when you've gone through meaningful, larger changes to the document. We have additional, there's a wiki on GitHub, there's something called GitHub discussions. Those are not permanent records as far as ITF is concerned. If, for example, you want a record of, well, use cases, which we have not decided to publish, but if you think it needs to be published, the only way things are published at the ITF is as internet drafts and eventually RFCs. So if you think something needs to be preserved for posterity, wiki is not the place, and it needs to be published as an internet draft. Having said that, if there are things like use cases that are only needed while the protocol is developed, but over time will not be very interesting, it's fine to have them on the wiki. And the wiki actually enables tracking of revisions and so on. So this is for documents. For issues, what we propose to do is to go all into the most extensive mode proposed by RFC 8874, issue discussion mode, where all issues are in fact managed and discussed on GitHub. If you sit down, read the document and have a long review, please publish it on the mailing list. And then there will be some discussion on the mailing list. and it's the reviewer who's tasked with opening issues on GitHub. We will have a weekly report. You've actually seen it already on the mailing list. A weekly report that allows those of us who are not watchers on GitHub to see what's going on, what new issues have been opened. And the expectation is that most per issue discussion will happen on GitHub. So feel free, of course, to jump into the discussion. If you want to follow the detailed discussion, the way to do it is by being watchers on GitHub. The editors are responsible to label issues, to tag issues as design issues that are more substantial and editorial issues that are less. And we might have more detailed labeling later on. We will start with design and editorial and move forward from that. It's for the editorial team. It's on the editorial team to close issues that are clearly resolved. And this judgment call is actually according to how controversial an issue is. Things that are more difficult should be taken to the list, possibly into meetings like this one. Things that are small and everybody discussing the issues have reached an agreement. In that case, it's okay for the editorial team to close the issue, and it's better to inform the list that an issue has been closed. And then again, issue closed. There should be a PR specific to that issue to implement it in the internet draft and allow people to review the final text. We ask that issues not be reopened unless there was a working group discussion and consensus to reopen the issue. Reopening issues can lead to too much process churn. So please don't do it. If something is important enough to you that you think it warrants reopening the issue, please bring it to the mailing list. Let's discuss it and decide whether an issue needs to be reopened. At any time for any issue, either the editors or the chairs can call for consensus, discussion and consensus on the mailing list. If you have not seen the weekly report yet, this is basically what it looks like. So the issues created, issues closed, some information about comments that have been made to issues, and pull requests. Editorial issues are exceptions. You don't see them in the weekly report, so as not to spam us too much. And with that, we will open the mic. If you have any questions or comments about process, this is the time, please.
And please raise your hands to get on the queue. I'm not seeing anybody. Well, Fabian, it's go ahead.
Yes, hello everyone. We had a specific question for the terminology part. So it's a bit specific because here there's a more long-term view of what we need to do. And so there was a few options here. The first one was a wiki. Then we had different issues for each individual item. And so I'd like to get some feedback from people on what basically you prefer.
And Fabian, could you please speak up?
Oh,
Yeah, I didn't fully.
I'm really next to the mic, but
Much better, thank you.
okay. So I was asking for some feedback from the mailing list on what you want to do for the terminology work. Do we use a wiki, which was suggested by Dick? Do we use issues, as was suggested by Francis? Well, the only thing is we need something where we list the terms and everything, and it's a long-term type of work, so it's a bit different from the rest of the issues. That's why I'm asking.
I'm seeing Justin. Do you want to speak to that, Justin? Do you have a suggestion?
Yeah,
Justin,
so
go.
I've actually, all right, thanks.
Go ahead.
So I've actually got a little bit of space in the editor's issue discussion for exactly that. The core of Fabian's question, though, is really about what kinds of tools we use and what we use them for. And there is this open issue of terminology where a specific set of tools has been brought up that we are looking for feedback on what kind of tools people are comfortable with using for the specific issue of gathering terminology. So I did see wikis in the list of available tools, but I think if I'm understanding Fabian's question is, does that make sense for gathering the sort of discussion and feedback and options and things like that in the wiki for the terminology itself? So we can talk about that a bit now. I do have some space in the editor's presentation of the issues list for that as well.
So why don't we see if your presentation deals with it, Justin, and we can get back to it in open mic if it wasn't resolved. How does that make sense, Fabian?
Yes, it's great.
All right.
Before we move on, I'd like to call for higher order comments if there are people who are unhappy with GitHub at all, have some issues with managing issues on GitHub or anything like that. Please speak up.
All right. 2 people on the queue. Dave, go. Dave, you're up.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Just a quick clarification. Are issues only to be opened after email on the list? I saw the long form discussion. Long form review should be an email on the list, and then after discussion, issues opened. Is that the only time issues can be opened, or if you're just reviewing the draft piecemeal, can issues be opened directly on GitHub?
I would encourage new issues, obviously substantial issues, not editorial issues, to first be sent to the list, and then you can immediately open an issue. But it's important for people to be aware of important things going into GitHub.
Lucy, you're up.
You're still muted.
Yeah, you're not sending audio. Oh, let's see here. Yeah, all right. Lucy seems to be having some issue with Meet Echo. So, Lucy, do you wanna come back? If you might have to reload Meet Echo and come back.
Or else bring it on the chat.
Yeah, I can channel. Yeah, I can channel to chat if you want us to do that. We have seen Meet Echo act up at the beginning of this ITF meeting for a number of people, so you know you're not alone, probably. All right. Right. I'm concerned about substantial work being stored on Git alone, Lucy says, and you know that is our concern as well. It is, you know, it's a fine line we're walking when we're using like dual streams, dual tools like this. All working groups sort of who try this sort of have some manner of issues, but you know we hope that the benefits outweigh the problems here, because we do expect, and we can already see that there are 113 issues right now open on GitHub. There's a lot of stuff to track without having the benefit of tooling. But yeah, that's a concern of the chairs as well. Jaron, do you want to say anything about this?
Yeah, my own experience is that it is important to have a record, and sometimes people refer back to the record of discussion on the mailing list. That's true.
Mm-hmm.
But we can be a lot more efficient by threading discussions on GitHub, and eventually I think we can be more inclusive because people can work on issues that they are interested in without being spammed with the whole thing. So I agree with Leaf that the benefits outweigh the costs.
So Lucy says on chat, supporting work that involves the working group needs to be mirrored on the list. Git isn't under ITF control long term. I can't disagree with that. All right, I have Dick on the queue. Dick?
I was wondering how we're going to link discussions on the mail list with issues in GitHub, right? If you've got a big review, it might actually be better to open all the issues and then post something to the mail list where you have a link to each of the issues at each point you're making, so people can sort of see holistically your whole review, but they know which issue in GitHub is related to the point you made in the mailing list.
So let me respond to that. I did exactly that for my own review. I responded to Justin's email with links into each of the issues that I opened for the points I raised.
Okay, well, that sort of sounds counter to what was suggested, which is that you post to the mail list and then open the issues.
Yeah, but then I link to them.
Oh, in a response. So
Yeah.
Is that what we should be doing then?
I think it's, well, at least polite to the rest of the list to let people know how things connect.
And
Right.
it also goes to Lucy's point here.
Right. I mean, I think that the GitHub's a great place for there be a focused discussion on one issue, but if we're getting consensus on that, it'd be nice if that got brought back to the mailing list, that we know something's,
Right.
looks
And
like
that's
it's right.
Exactly. And when you, as Jaron said, when we close issues, we expect that to happen right in conjunction with like an update to the text, so the review team can mirror back right the conclusion of a discussion.
Okay.
Or I should say the editor team, not the review team. All right, too early in the morning for me. All right. Yaron, should we move ahead? I'm not seeing anyone else in the queue. I do see Bron so Roman pointing out that consensus must be on the mailing list, which is absolutely true. And Bron, I don't know if you want to say people who haven't had audio issues can just speak up at the list. I'm not going to mirror everything to, or speak up at the queue. I'm not going to.
Yeah. So
mirror
Bron,
everything. And
if
Bron,
you think this
you want to
this
say
needs to go to everybody, please come to the queue.
Well, no, maybe not.
Otherwise, let's move on. So, Justin, you're next.
Right.
All right, I'm gonna see if I can share my screen here.
If you can also go on video, that'll be nice.
Yeah, I'm just getting Meet Echo to play nice here. I will also go on video. Sorry about the infinite windows. There we go.
Cool.
Okay. All right. All right. I think we're good. Can you guys see the slide deck? This is also uploaded to the meeting materials page. All right. So hello, everybody. Good evening and good morning and good middle of the night in my case. This is the editor's update for Gnap for IETF 109 Virtual. So yeah, welcome to Gnap. Let's get moving here. A little bit of background first. I want to remind everybody that even though we're working in a similar space, we are not working on extensions to OAuth 2. So this is a philosophy that should be guiding our decisions. Just because we did something one way in OAuth 2 does not mean we need to do it the same way here. We really need to be taking a step back from what OAuth 2 does and asking ourselves, is this the same way that we want to do it now? But that also doesn't mean that we're going to ignore everything that we've learned over the last decade of OAuth 2. Also, because this has come up a bit recently, people have been talking about this work as OAuth 3. I want to remind everybody, this is not OAuth 3. OAuth 3 is not real. At least not yet. If at some point the OAuth working group decides to start OAuth 3, it could start it based on Gnap, could start it based on something else. But right now, this is Gnap. Gnap is Gnap and OAuth is OAuth, and they are separate things. Also, keep in mind that everything that we do here, we are not supplanting OAuth 2. It's not really going anywhere. It solves a lot of use cases and it's been around for a decade, but it has its limits because it's been around for a decade. And this is our opportunity to take a look at moving beyond what OAuth 2 has really enabled us to do. There are some core design considerations about everything that we're working on in this protocol. Fundamentally, this is a protocol for negotiating access between multiple parties in multiple roles. We have decided, and a lot of this comes from, you can dig into the charter text that we debated and came to consensus on. A lot of our work is going to be around making the interaction methods for getting humans in the security process, validating the client software that's going to be talking to all of these things and sort of transferring trust into them, methods for tying keys into the various messages which can authenticate the client software, but also do general key presentation for a lot of different things. I mean, we really want to bring the cryptographic trust up to the fore here. And also, we really need to look at the underlying data models, particularly of the things that are being requested. So as the working group knows, between the last meeting and now, a design team was formed by the chairs. We met a number of times over a few months and created a draft that has been accepted as the working group starting point. There are 3 editors. I believe all 3 of us are on the call. I saw Aaron and Fabian in the list there, and you guys heard Fabian a minute ago, and myself as well. We'll be serving as editors of the document, which means it is our job to express and codify the working group consensus and sort of help move that forward. And in the current document, there are lots of notes and sort of decision points, because one of the things with the working group is we knew that it wasn't final. Now, those issues, as Yaron was just talking about, are going to be tracked in GitHub going forward. And I do think that that is the right tool. It is a really good tool for managing this kind of stuff. There's also a couple of test implementations already in the work for the current draft. I have an implementation. I know a number of other people who are starting to implement various parts of this, because remember, this is the IETF. We believe in rough consensus and running code. And so the decisions that we make here in this working group really do need to be borne out in running code. That should be part of our decision process. So the design team output a single document, which was the direction of the chairs, and really to give us a starting point. This is something that combines functional aspects of what was known as XYZ and XOF, the 2 individual drafts that both myself and Dick Hart had authored as inputs into the working group. And the goal of the design team was to create a single cohesive protocol, but not something that was final output. So there are lots of decisions yet to be made, lots of work ahead of us. And even though what was in draft 0 kind of makes sense as it is, that doesn't mean that that's the best that we can do. Well, we don't think it is, which is what our job as a working group is going to be, is to now take this single protocol and move things forward. And if you had implemented either XYZ or XOF previously, you'll notice that the Gnap core protocol isn't directly compatible with either of those. It pulls things from both of those, and there's still a lot that we need to sort out. In both draft 0 and 1, so currently the draft is at version 1, which is still very close to the design team's output. There are a number of editor's notes peppered throughout the document, 92, I believe it was at my last count. And they are currently in line in the group document, but as you probably saw on the list, we've gone through and extracted all of these into GitHub issues. And we have already reviewed and merged a pull request that will remove the inline text and replace those with links to the GitHub issues. Now, these are only for the editor's notes that we're doing this, because the idea of the editor's note was to provide sort of a record of a decision point for the group to talk about, at least start the conversation about. We don't plan on peppering the draft document with links into GitHub going forward, although we can definitely do that when there is a longstanding issue or a number of different options or something that the group is still in the process of discussing. So that's something that the editors are going to be able to leverage going forward. But right now we wanted to pull all of the editor's notes out of the document because having them in the document means that they're kind of static, and we can't really have an ongoing reflected discussion on them. So those are all in GitHub issues now. The editor's process Yaron was talking about, so the editors have met now, and every single change to the document is going to be going through pull requests. So you'll be able to see individual change sets over time. And the editors are doing a self-imposed requirement of review from at least one other editor, even for simple editorial changes like typo fixes and things like that, because it's better to have more eyes on it, even for something simple like that, to make sure that we're not, doing something that we don't intend here. All substantial changes, which includes any substantial pull requests that change normative text and things like that, need to be verified on the list. And finally, we're going to be tagging every single document release in the repository so that you'll be able to diff the source between multiple things. Now, speaking of the source, currently it is Markdown using the Cramdown RFC 2629 project. We are going to be checking in the Markdown, but we will not be checking in the XML, HTML, and text files into GitHub. Those will be part of the normal IETF draft release cycle. So we will be generating the XML, and Data Tracker will handle all of those archival and human readable versions of that. The repository has a Docker file and a build script for you guys to be able to build this on your own. It currently will generate the HTML file, and if you are running Docker, you'll be able to do that without having to install all of the Ruby and Python libraries to actually make this run. Okay. Also, heads up, chairs, with this up on my screen, I can't actually see the queue or anything, so feel free to chime in if I need to shut up for a minute and we need more discussion. All right, awesome. Thank you, Leif. Okay, so the editors wanted to talk about a couple of different specific issues. Now, as you guys will notice, there are a lot of issues on GitHub right now. Most of those are the editor's notes. A bunch of them aren't. And we will be working on discussing and closing and resolving those as we go forward in time here. So if there's something that needs to change, or there's something that needs to be discussed, please open an issue. But as per what Yaron said a few minutes ago, if it is a substantive discussion of like, hey, this is a decision point we really need to make, like that discussion has to at least have an artifact on the list to make the list aware of it, that there is a substantive issue. The editors will also take all substantive pull requests that we create and send them into the list. So anytime we will be making a change into the document, we'll not only be doing our internal review with the three of us, but also sending it to the list for confirmation and whatnot. One thing to keep in mind for all of these issues and pull requests is that the goal here for each of these is never necessarily to come up with the perfect answer and the perfect phrasing, but it's always to make it better. Because at the end of the day, issues and pull requests and changes are relatively cheap, and they are all in the open. So if something, especially for a potentially controversial issue, if something moves us forward, if something actually, helps drive the discussion forward, you may see things that are accepted and merged and even potentially published that are not final yet. Like that, this is still a work in progress. In cases like that, we may, if it's an ongoing discussion, the editors may embed a new link to that discussion issue in the document itself to have that kind of cross-linking record. But over time, we expect those to be removed from the document. All right. With that, the editors have gone and handpicked a couple of issues that we thought would be best for discussion here at this meeting. And we'll start off with a doozy. Terminology. we are coming at this protocol from a world that already has things like OAuth and OpenID Connect. But there's also a lot of other stuff out there that's working in similar spaces. There's a lot of work in the SSI world. There's all of the work on, SIBA and user managed access that are sort of, around the OAuth space. So we've got a chance to ask ourselves what we mean when we call things certain things. And, we get to decide what things are named and what things are defined as. So per Fabian's question earlier, how do we avoid endless months of bike shedding and arguing about what exactly we call something? What is a specific term? And one of the ways that we can do that is to that's been proposed is to collect terms on GitHub issues. Another proposal has been to use a wiki to describe everything and sort of refine things on the wiki. Another proposal has been to have either separate files or issues for each identified term and then sort of iterate within those. The editors would like feedback on what the working group has for an appetite for doing all of these things. I can provide my own take on what works, what I've seen work and what I've seen not work. But we would like input from the group. So if there's anybody that wants to speak to this.
Right. I see Dick Hart on the queue, so go ahead, Dick.
Yeah, I made the suggestion of the wiki, not to have the wiki be where we had a discussion, but just as a wiki to be able to summarize what are all the terms, what are the proposed definitions, what are different names for the same kind of thing, so that we have one place to see it all, where right now it's scattered through the RFC, and having it scattered across a bunch of issues seems a lot harder for people to look at and understand how they all fit together.
All right, thank you, Dick.
Just as a chair's comment here, would you, Dick, or I guess this is for anyone in the group. You guys see this as a permanent thing? Are we publishing this as an appendix or as a section in the core document at some point, or what do we do with this?
So from my perspective, we should have a terminology section and something that actually collects all of these. There's the start of it in the introduction. It's not comprehensive and it's a lot looser than it needs to be in the current draft document. But in my view, we should be moving towards a terminology section. Whether or not that's the exact content of the wiki, I don't know, but yeah, I think there should be a section.
Yaron, go ahead.
Yeah, not as a chair, but I don't like terminology discussions all that much, but I think we should get it over as soon as possible and maybe have a goal of concluding the discussion about terminology by the next IETF, because it's really, really costly to go through global changes afterwards and people will just be confused. So whether it's wiki or not, whatever, let's get it over with.
All right, sounds good.
Dick, you're up. Dick. Did you want to say something? You're in the queue. I'm going to drop you and you can come back. Fabian?
Yes, I would support Yaron's comment on that. I think we need to stabilize on the next few weeks and have something ready for the next ETF meeting so that we don't, spend all our time on terminology issues. Of course, we can change a definition or something later on. That's not a big deal, but at least have the list defined would be important.
All right. I'm not hearing a lot of voices in support of either solution here, but it doesn't sound like people are opposed to using a wiki for this.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a good starting point, and maybe
Okay.
you know, if we were going to talk about the interims at some point here, and it might be a good goal for maybe the first interim to sort of spend a little time closing this. So you know, use a GitHub wiki, gather all of the various terms, and then use some time on the first interim to just sort of well, polish this off. Does that make sense to people?
Yeah. So
Lucy says, I think scoping is more important on the. And you know, this is not. We're not talking about terminology as opposed to other things, right? We want to get it out of the way as quickly as possible. That's my sense.
yeah.
And Aaron,
Go ahead.
do you want to say something about that, Justin? Otherwise, I'm gonna let Aaron speak. And
Yeah, I was just going to agree. I think that a wiki, when used as this is something that I've commented on the issue. It's terrible for discussion, but it's good for sort of collecting this sort of current state. Discussion either on issue 29, or if you create a new issue for a specific term or something like that, if you want to, make sure you link it back to this one, and then let's pull all of that into the wiki. I think that's something that the editors can lead. Fabian's already started a page that we can start to use for that.
Aaron.
Yeah, I was just going to say the wiki idea, I'm in support of that as long as it's within the context of that's the sort of quick place to capture the current state of the discussions, which eventually ends up back in the actual draft. I don't think it's a good long-term plan for anything to live there, but it is faster to make edits to that than it is to publish new drafts. So as far as capturing the current discussions and a place to work, I think the wiki is a fine solution for that.
All right. And Lucy made a note in the chat about sort of being able to defend terminology, which is great advice. I suggest we call time on this and move on.
All right. Thanks. There was one specific thing that I wanted to bring to people's attention because this was a discussion from the design team on a particular term that I don't think necessarily came through clearly in the draft because it was relatively late in the design team process. The proposal here is that we specifically replace what's now called the resource client or client within the document, and specifically talk about something called a client instance, and whether we workshop that name or whatever. The idea here being that a distinct instance is a cryptographic identity, which means that it always means it has access to a specific key. And I went through the document, and almost every single place where we talk about the RC or the client, almost every single place from the protocol's perspective, we're really talking about a single client instance performing an action or waiting for a response or whatnot. That is my first proposal into changing the terminology because this reflects where the discussion on the design team had already been going, and we've already got a few places in the document that use this term. But I think that we can actually make this more universal, which leads us into the next set of issues. So unless there's people on the queue specifically for this, I was going to go on to the broader discussion of client software. All right. Not hearing pitchforks. One of the things that we really want to do with this work, where we can move beyond OAuth 2, or sort of the assumptions that OAuth 2 made all those years ago, is separating this notion of a client instance from the software that is running that instance. This is something that OAuth 2 is really, if you look at the OAuth 2.1 work that is going on in the OAuth working group, this is something that OAuth 2 is continuing to struggle with and trying to make new definitions for. There's now a thing called a credentialed client, which isn't in the original OAuth 2 draft, but it's trying to capture a notion that OAuth 2 didn't quite get right. In the current protocol, the client instance can send either an instance identifier, so this is basically a reference, like a client ID that the AS can use to figure out, all of the information about it, or it can send a client information block, much like dynamic registration, but inlined. And there's some other hooks and tools and stuff like that. So far, this seems to be a pretty robust system to allow us to do this. So the questions are sort of how it allows us to address these, wide set of use cases. So we've got static clients, we've got ephemeral clients, we've got mobile clients, which is, static software over long-term instances on a bunch of devices, versus SPAs, which is software on a bunch of short-lived instances on a bunch of different devices. So, there's lots of different notions of what a client instance could be and how it can be represented. Which brings us to the first question of, since we're talking about individual instances, especially from the AS side, we're going to want to rope those together somehow. Now in OAuth 2 dynamic registration, we had this thing called a software statement, and the use of that concept goes way, way back, long before OAuth 2 even had a dynamic registration step. But it's also been one of the things we discussed on the design team, was that one of the way that OAuth 2 uses client ID is as a class identifier. If you look at mobile applications and SPAs, that's what the client ID kind of does in that case. But here we want to, in Gnap, we know we want to separate this notion of identifying an instance versus identifying a class. But are there other things that we can do, other mechanisms that we can provide in Gnap to tie a bunch of instances together, and how are those expressed, and how are those carried by the client and presented to the AS? The reason for tying these together is so that you can set a bunch of policies to a set of instances and say that I want to treat all these the same. So if the user says, for example, like, I want to stop using this SPA, then any outstanding tokens on any instances of that SPA is probably what the user meant to get rid of. Or, for example, you're managing it based on software version or platform or stuff like that. And you can see here, since we're starting with the instance as sort of the core unit, we have a lot more flexibility and a lot more power in describing how we tie these things together. So we need to come up, we've got a couple of ways to do things like this in the core draft now. This is something that we need to move forward and sort of solidify. But there's also additional cases around sending information about the client software and the client instance as part of the protocol. So one of the problems with OAuth dynamic registration is that I can just show up and my display name is Google, and I can just say this is Google Docs. I mean, we saw an attack like this in the real world a few years ago. And so if I could send a way for the AS to verify that the presenter of this display information is allowed to present that specific display information, we could move that that trust forward. In the OAuth world, we've seen this done with software statements through third-party pre-registration services. Open Banking UK has that, for example. Moderna has that in the Mobile Connect space. But there are probably a lot of other things we can do as well. One of the most promising ones that I think we can bring forward, and people have proprietary versions of this out there already, is a way to convey runtime posture and attestation. So be able to say, like, you know, hey, this is the software that I'm running, and I can tell you about the platform that I'm running on and all of this other stuff. This is one of the biggest questions, and this is one of the 3 issues that that I've tagged here with this, is we need to understand the difference between information that might be sent every single request. So in that case, you know, it might vary over a specific instance over time, versus stuff that you would only send in a first request, so a registration type, you know, posture information. Is there a difference between those? Do we need ways to tie those together? And how does the protocol syntax enable us to do this in a way that isn't convoluted? All right. Anybody on the queue?
I'm going to join the queue as myself, because nobody else is there, and say that software statements, or the kind of things that software statements are, you know, both are also used for federation. And, you know, collating things together can be based on other things than just posture and software. It could be, you know, whether the organization running it has some certain property, right? So that kind of, I think that kind of stuff is important to preserve. Not sure whether it's software or posture related though.
Yeah, no, I agree. There's a lot of other dimensions that we've seen people try to cram in the real world. So if you look at the, you know, some of the stuff in the financial industry, it's not talking about the nature of the software itself. It's actually talking about the nature of the organization that's publishing the software. They and sort of the assertion that you're sending is that I have the right to even start talking to you. So that would be kind of a first request kind of thing, you know, this first introduction. But we have also seen, like I said, it's largely been in proprietary systems in my experience, but we've also seen people saying, like, you know, hey, this is the device signature of this application, which I can tie back to our, you know, internal key to show you that I'm running unmodified software, for example. So, you know, there's this whole bag of things, and there's a lot of feeling that this is the kind of stuff that we want. I think that we need to start making this concrete and finding places for this kind of stuff, so that Gnap, even if it doesn't define all of these different bits and pieces, at least gives us places to put all of these pieces in the protocol. This is something that really needs to be brought to the fore.
Right. And Lucy made the point on on chat that as soon as you bring granting things into the play, then you have to think about revocation as well.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Yeah, and revocation of multiple instances, really important here. Yeah. Okay, cool.
Nobody else is standing up, so, you know.
All right, let's move on then. So continuation. So this is something, and continuation is one of the terms we need to potentially workshop. But currently in the protocol, this is, you know, you start the request, and then you potentially interact, and then you do something to further that request. This includes managing the request over sort of a long period. So think like, you know, certain flavors of step up or things like that. But it's also like, hey, I just got something back from the, you know, from the front channel redirect, give me the access token. So the auth code step of OAuth 2. Right now, the continuation process in the draft, it contains a mandatory URL that's sent back to the client for, you know, where it goes, sort of the base of the API for it to make its next request. And it currently has an optional access token for continuing and managing that request over time. That access token, it's important to point out, is not a bearer token. It is defined as being bound to the same key that the client used to make the initial request or its subsequent rotation. And key rotation is a whole other issue. We're not going to dive into that tonight. But in any event, the questions here are, what is the value of having those different options? We could keep it as it is with an optional access token and semantics about what the client is supposed to do when it's present and when it's not. We could require the token to be mandatory and sort of define this continuation API in terms of that access token. Or we could remove the access token entirely, in which case we also have to ask ourselves, does the continuation URI need to have constraints on it in terms of its uniqueness and whatnot. The current design reflects a sort of compromise of different design patterns that the design team came up with. And this is what they look like. So the first continuation response, you get an internal access token as well as a URI to use it at. In addition to, there are some other flags that you can get as part of that. But this is giving the client all of the information it needs in order to make the next step. Now, this is, I will say that in general, this pattern is very key to Gnap in terms of the client starts everything with one message and then is told where to go next. And this is a really important aspect to the design in terms of its security and simplicity of the clients, because it makes things much more deterministic. So anyway, in this case, the client is given the access token in the URI. In this case, the client is just given the URI with no access token. So when the client goes and makes its follow-up call to this URI, it actually still has to present proof of its keys, the keys that started with it, but it does not have an access token. In this, we're actually using the exact same, this is the first example, we're using the exact same syntax for that's currently defined for an access token that comes back for accessing a resource server externally. So the value, the key, all of those fields are allowed to show up inside there. It's the same access token kind of structure. This is actually also currently allowed by the current spec, where what you're doing is you're getting back a continuation URI, but without additional stuff. This is a non-unique continuation URI, and the idea here being that the AS would limit a client instance to one ongoing request, whether that's okay or not. This is a design pattern that is currently enabled by the current text. So a bit of comparison.
Yaron wants to say something in the queue. Do you want to?
Okay, yeah, go ahead. I was just going to go between the two approaches.
Yeah, sorry, I wanted to make a comment about the previous issue. So let's be done with this one instead of me interrupting.
All right, go. Okay, go ahead then. Justin.
Okay, so let's go this. So this is a design decision that the working group needs to make. So the access token approach really treats authorization as an API. And this was one of the core design patterns of the XAuth draft that's gone into Gnap now. The use of an access token here treats that API the same way that we would be treating a resource server API. And we're assuming that the client already knows how to do this. The key binding mechanics are the same, and getting this inlined access token to access a specific API is a pattern that the OAuth 2 world uses with dynamic client registration management. So you're handed the URI to manage your client and the access token to do that in a response without the client having to go and fetch a separate access token. You're given that sort of as a bundle, but it's a separable bundle. And the importance of that separability in this design pattern is that allows lots of different deployment patterns for the AS. You could even have a fully stateless AS by packing everything that you need to about the ongoing request into the access token. Now, I will say you could actually also do that by packing that into the URI, in which case the URI effectively becomes a capability URI. There are trade-offs of doing that, of course. And both approaches, I will say, also allow us to separate the sort of the ongoing request from the start of the request, which allows us for some really interesting distributed authorization server models that a lot of people that I've been talking to over the last couple of years are really interested in bringing forward. So benefits of a token-free approach is that there's fewer moving parts. So if we never give back an access token here, you are just given a URL and you're making a request to that URL and not having to worry about presenting this additional artifact. And this means we are defining different behaviors for talking to the auth server versus a resource server, which means that the auth server doesn't have to manage special tokens for limiting access to sort of its own internal processes. Personally, I don't see that as a benefit, but it has been brought up as one of the benefits of this approach. That's all I have on this issue. Do we have anybody on the queue for this before we jump back to Yaren's?
So, Dick.
So, like, my understanding is the client's still going to authenticate in every call to the AS. Right? It's not just getting an access token, it's presenting as a bearer token, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. It's a bound access token using the same semantics that bound access tokens use.
Well, assuming that the client uses bound access tokens in calling the RS.
I mean, yeah, it's the same syntax and mechanisms. Whether the client uses, whether the RS uses bound access tokens is a separate question, but it would be represented the same way and use the same mechanics.
Yeah, but in a, well, not all the mechanisms for binding a token go and have the access token in the, you know, they're not going to say Gnap as the type of token in authorization, right? They say other things. It's not the same mechanism.
All of the current key presentation mechanisms have methods for covering the access token in the request.
No, what I'm saying is the method. You have authorization, Gnap, and then the access token when you call here.
Yeah.
Versus other ones like Depop and things like that have a different token style. Like they say Depop. Right. So it's not the same as how you call a resource server. Right, and if you're just calling it with bearer tokens, then this is a different mechanism.
Yeah, the bearer tokens would not be allowed here.
Right. So that the client isn't doing the same thing in how it calls the RS as it calls an AS. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yes, it would be. So one of the things about it would be the same. So
the client's calling an RS with a bearer token. It's not going to call the AS with the bearer token, so it's not the same thing.
Right. Yes. Okay. Fine. But that's only if you're. But that's a different thing from saying that presenting a bound token using a single. Okay. I think I might see the disconnect here. What I mean by we're reusing the same mechanisms is that a client presenting a bound access token in a particular method to the AS would use the exact same method when talking to the RS. That's the part I'm reusing. We're not saying that the access tokens that you get for calling the RS have to be bound. That is a separate discussion. But the ones talking to the AS would have to be bound. That would be a limitation here?
Well, they're not really bound. The client's authenticating and it knows which client it is and it happens to go and get the access token, right? I mean, you have the same functional equivalent whether you
Dick,
put
just to
information in
just
the...
to clarify,
Yeah.
I want to clarify. Are you arguing
Mhm.
for or against either option here?
I'm disagreeing with the number of statements that Justin has made. And so I don't think that the points are accurately reflected here.
Right, but I think it
Yeah,
might
so
be
at-
better if
I
you
don't
get to
think
the
the
point of arguing for or against either
Yeah.
proposal.
I think the access token doesn't give us, it's a convenience for the server. If the server wants to put state, they can put the state into a URL. And it's a bunch of extra overhead for a client to figure this out. And so I was going at that it isn't something that the client already has. It's going to be some potential new thing for the client, unless the client happens to be calling an RS that works the same way. But I don't even think it's the same way between how you call an RS and when you call an AS.
So the client would be using the same key presentation mechanism when making its initial call. It would just be doing so without an access token. So all of the key presentation mechanisms are functionally the same, but they also have a place to slot the access token.
So Aaron is up on the queue.
Yeah, I just want to chime in here and say that between these two options, I'm hesitant to recommend an option that puts more things into URLs, just because we've seen many reasons why putting things in URLs causes problems. Some of those we are currently dealing with in the OAuth group and trying to undo those. So I would generally prefer putting things that are effectively bearer tokens or secrets or things that may contain encoded data that the client may not even be aware of, keeping those out of the URL. Yeah, like Justin just put up this screen. If you imagine that thing on the end might end up containing some sort of encoded data the client's not aware of, where it's a JSON Web Token, for example, that contains data, then that is now being sent in a URL, which then has all the possibilities of being exposed or logged in all the reasons that we're trying to avoid putting things in URLs now. So that's my take on it. I'd rather avoid cramming more things in URLs.
All right. Anyone else on this issue? Yaron, did you want to walk back to the previous issue, and then we
Yes,
can maybe close this?
Yeah,
Yes,
which
I
part?
think this also applies to this one because this is a process comment. So
Okay.
my request to Justin is to conclude each issue with whatever it is. So for the case of client information, are you asking the working group to, for example, send use cases? Are you asking people to comment on an issue, and if so, which issue it is? Are you saying the editor team will come up with a proposal and put it to the list? Whatever it is, let us know.
Okay, thank you. That's great. So for the client information, I think we've got a reasonable first step on the first issue, which was terminology. For the client information, we've got 3 issues here. One of the issues, I believe it's 46, is more of, just sort of contextual information. And there are a lot of those that came from the editorial notes that I think the editorial team can kind of, we can just kind of scrape through the issues list and say, like, yeah, we believe this is just commentary and we can just close these and move on. For the other 2, there's the question of device posture, which we would like to see. I think we as a group need to see concrete examples of this is the information that I'm sending. So far, we've seen a lot of sort of notional examples of, oh, I want to send my MDM signature, but let's take a look on what that information actually looks like and start answering this question of whether or not, you know, this is like a registration request or a runtime request type of attestation. I think we need to get concrete here with this kind of stuff. And so the editors do not have specific direction for this right now, but we would like feedback on these issues in particular to help sort of hone this client model and how this gets presented, especially in the initial request. This will have follow-on effects to a number of other issues that have been opened in the protocol. But I think that once we really start to make this notion of what the client instance is really concrete, and sort of what this request structure can look like, we can start to solidify our decisions on these others. So yes, please comment on the issues. Please give us real examples, real use cases of this kind of stuff. If we don't get any, maybe we just don't leave a spot for it right now, and we can kind of close that and move on until we get something concrete. For continuation, issue 67, I would like, you know, the editors would like to hear from the group what direction we should take. Like, should we make the token mandatory? Should we remove the token? Like, and whether that URL needs to be required to be unique. You know, I have a stance on it. I think the token should be mandatory. You know, Aaron stated, if I'm summarizing correctly, I believe he's in that camp as well. We would like to hear from the rest of the working group what direction this should take. I don't think anybody's particularly happy with it being optional.
I got Dave at the queue, so.
Okay.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so look, you know, I know we don't want to just always compare to OAuth2, but you know, with the various extensions to OAuth2, essentially, you know, there's been a bit of backwards and forwards. Some have required kind of client authentication at the AS and just repeating the client the same as the token endpoint, and others have gone the access token approach. I suppose my input would be that I think we should try and avoid the optionality. And it seems to me the benefit of potentially having distributed AS, you know, would lean very heavily in favor of the access token approach. But my request would be that whatever one we agree on, there is just one way. And I think that's maybe a general thing in the draft where possible. I really think we need to try and cut down the optionality, because it's just going to make it a nightmare with the current amount of optionality there.
Yep. All right, thank you. And to be clear, what we're talking about, and this was in the previous thing, is that bearer tokens would be forbidden as an option here. Like, the client is always going to be presenting its key, which means in this context, it is in most cases going to be authenticating to the AS. Although we have to keep in mind the dynamic and ephemeral use cases we have, where authentication really just means it's the same key that I saw the first time, you know, as part of the first request. All right. So please provide feedback of that on the issue, and hopefully we can close on a direction for that, and the editors we'll bring that to the list for consensus.
I'm here right now. I'm hearing a slight tilt towards the current text, but we'll see where we are. So should we move on to the next issue?
Sounds good to me. All right, interaction bundles. And so the current document, it gives you multiple interaction methods for starting interaction and one post interaction method. They're all kind of lumped in there. And I will note, in case people didn't get to see this, so just before I logged onto this call, I saw that Aaron actually made a really good comment to that. So Aaron, once I'm done presenting kind of the current state, if you could jump on the queue to talk about that, that would be wonderful. So the thing about these interaction bundles is that it gives you, well, in the current document, you've got a few different ways to get the user over there that the client can choose from, but only one thing that they're allowed to do post-interaction. There are some proposed use cases that people would like to be able to do that this doesn't allow expression of. So alternative one would be to couple the post-interaction with each single interaction method. And alternative two is to allow multiple interaction bundles. So to get concrete, what this looks like right now is that the redirect and user code portions say how you get the user over there. And then the callback is the post interaction. You know, again, these might not all be the best names for each of these fields. We'll bike shed that later. Callback is the post interaction action set. So the first proposed alternative is to bundle the post interaction with the method of getting over there. So what this is saying is that either I can send you to an arbitrary URL or give you a user code, but in both cases, however that works, send a callback to this URL that I'm going to be listening on in a browser redirect. Alternative one is to say, okay, for the arbitrary URL, I want you to call back to this URL. So this is closer to the OAuth 2 grant type where everything is kind of tied together. And I'll also point out that this is how early versions of the XYZ project implemented this before we move to something that's more like what's in the current draft. The second alternative is to optionally allow for having bundles. So, you know, just throwing, so just pulling some names out of the air, we could say that each of these individual pieces would be an interaction method, and then you combine those into an interaction mode, which means that if you are doing a single request, so just like a single post-interaction option, you would bundle that into a single mode and you would send that as the interact value. If you have multiple bundles, you would explicitly separate them into different objects and pass all of that as an array. And each of these individual pieces in that array is going to be the same syntax that that a single object would be. This follows similar patterns that we've had elsewhere in the protocol. Aaron, did you want to talk about your your start finish idea? Because I think that's got some legs.
Right, go ahead, Aaron.
Sure, yeah, it took me a second to remember what you were talking about because I went and filed a whole bunch of issues on GitHub as I was over the spec, which now I'm going to go ahead and summarize and post as a threaded discussion, or as a discussion on a mailing list linking to these issues. Mm-hmm. But yes, the alternative three, I guess, the way I was thinking about it was that this interaction, there's a start and a finish operation. The client's saying, here's different ways I can start the flow, and here's different ways I can handle the end of the flow. And things that go in the start of the flow are whether the client can redirect the user in a browser, whether it can redirect the user to an app, whether it can show a code to the user, things like that. And then how it can complete the flow is, I think we only have callback defined right now. So yeah, callback either as a in-browser redirect or as a post request back to that callback. So, and the third option, which I don't think is in your slide here, but is the UI locales hint to localize the interface, which is a really good suggestion. And that's a completely different class of sort of thing it's describing compared to how it's going to start the flow and how it's going to finish the flow. So I guess you probably can't pull up my little sample, Jason, but essentially what I had done suggested adding top level properties for start and finish, which are arrays of the different ways that each of those things could happen. It's 122.
Oh, 122? Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
So the so the idea would be taking all the existing values that are currently described, but then grouping them so that it's like a lot more clear about what each thing is doing.
Mm-hmm. And so I think going along the lines of this and the proposed second alternative would be that if you had different ways you wanted to bundle this, then you would allow the client to send an array of these. And then, of course, we got to figure out what the response looks like and how to tie them together and, you know, stuff like that if we go down that route. But yeah, this is all tied together. So is anybody on the queue?
I'm not. No. Nobody
Okay.
else.
Okay, then I'm going to pull this back. Did I do? I hate that. Hang on. Got to. Fighting with PowerPoint is always fun. Okay, so what the editors would like is feedback on issues 59 and 122. You know, I think we can nail down what exactly we want, and it needs to be use case driven. A lot of this discussion up until this point has been, it's really been driven by this notion of how we deal with post interaction. There doesn't seem to be a lot of controversy about having multiple ways to start the interaction, giving the client lots of different options. And, you know, there have been conversations that I've had outside of sort of the IETF space where people want to use new protocols, like the W3C has the CHAPI protocol, DIF has the DIDCOM protocol. There's a lot of, you know, there's also the whole FIDO family of protocols. People want to use different ways to kind of kick things off. But the sticking point seems to be this notion of what we do post-interaction and how we tie that into the rest. So that's what the editors would like feedback on so that we can hopefully nail this down and move forward.
So a question to you, Justin. We did some work on collecting use cases. Is that useful for the editorial team to resolve this issue? So can you go through the use cases and see how they apply to your ideas?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's some of those use cases that are driving this question of whether or not the current syntax is expressive enough. And so the question is then really, does the are the changes warranted in order to support the use cases that need that additional expression? So, I mean, this is security. It's going to be complex, but we always need to balance between doing things that are, you know, fully and beautifully expressive versus things that people will actually get right. And this is something, though, that I think that we can, I think we can give people sort of core options that allow us to keep the simple methods simple, but still allow for really robust expression when needed. So my current feeling, seeing what's been proposed, would be a combination of alternative 2 and Aaron's syntax. So basically, allow an array, but each member of the array is based on Aaron's proposed syntax or, an iteration thereon. That's my current thought. I would love to hear other people's takes on what we can do there. So, all right. Okay.
All right, let's move on.
All right, sounds good. So token request syntax. This is another thing that we kind of bounced around a little bit in the design team. And I don't think we're quite there yet. So the current method, when you're requesting access tokens, either single or multiple access tokens, it's pretty simple for clients because it's analogous to OAuth scope. There's a list of things which added together describe the token that you want, right? But that means just like with OAuth scopes, it's really kind of awkward to send in additional flags or fields or things like that. So right now we've got this whole section on token flags for sort of signaling token behavior or requested token behavior. So the proposal in issue 40, which is going to spider out to a number of sort of token syntax related issues if we go in this direction, is to take what we have right now, which is just the resources array. And so it's the resources array that's in the request. Everything in here is what manages what happens with the access token. The proposal is that instead of just sending this array, we actually have an access token request portion of the object, which includes the resources array, which we can still describe and still use all of the same, rich semantics and flexible syntax that we've got now. But hang other stuff about the access token up at that higher level. So whether or not it's bound to a sort of the client's key, whether we're allowed to split it, that's a separate issue if we're going to keep that function. So, table that idea for now. But if we were to allow that, whether in the core or even in an extension, this is how we would actually describe it. We would put it inside the access token right here. This also would necessarily change how we request multiple access tokens. So the idea here being that the access token, if it's an array, it would contain each of these individual objects. Now, this does get us away from what I've always felt was a really elegant solution to dealing with multiple tokens, and that's requiring labels. And the current multiple access token syntax forces you to create a unique label because that's enforced just in the JSON without any JSON schema or anything else. The JSON syntax enforces that because we use the left-hand value for the label. I really like that. However, it's limiting because it allows it doesn't allow us to sort of hang extra stuff on it in a way that is detectable at a type level, right? You would have to do sort of deep object inspection to figure out what kind of thing is there. And we'll get more into why that's a bad idea when we talk about the next issue. But we could pull this off using this sort of object syntax if we had an internal label for the access token. And the response would be very similar as well. So right now we have resources in the request and then access token in the response, which has a whole bunch of stuff tied to it. We would be moving towards access token in the request and access token in the response. And with internal labeling, we would be able to mirror those two. That is nice in terms of simplicity. It makes it a little bit harder in dealing with the potential error cases because now nothing in the syntax enforces uniqueness of the labels, and so that's something that would have to be checked at the application layer on top of that, for example.
So Jaron wants to say something. Do you want to say it? You want to do this now, Jaron, or what?
Yeah. So a little bit of bike shading, but still, I think the name access token for the structure is not very good. Maybe access token properties, attributes, or just access. This is the access you're looking to get. Access token is, well, a token. This is not it.
Yeah, yeah, I get that, and I like the idea of labeling this access. What I was trying to do with this straw man was to parallelize the request and response. I may have gone too far in that direction, but yeah, that's a great comment. But so Yaron, this does. This is in response to some of the comments that that you brought up, in addition to some of the editor's notes. You know, proposing this idea of having other ways to signal things. Oh, and one other thing I want to point out, there was something that got brought up a few times about allowing a client to specify a different key to bind a token to, or at least allowing a client to signal like, hey, you know, this access token I actually want bound to, maybe it's this derived key or whatever, which is separate from the key the client is using to talk to the AS. The syntax would actually give us a relatively clean way to do that, because this we could have, you know, as in the straw man, a key field and send a public key value as part of the request. There's a really clean way to express that. And this again is the key that would be bound to presentation of that access token. So it would allow us to reuse a lot of that same structure. But anyway, what the editors would like is that, since this would be a larger bit of surgery to the protocol that would have effects on both the requests and the responses throughout the protocol, we'd really like feedback if this is moving in the right direction. If we should maybe just try to put a stake in the ground and see how this feels in the course of the spec, or if we're going way off into the woods here. And again, that is issue 40.
Dick is in the queue, so.
Okay.
Do you want to go ahead, Dick?
Yep. Yep. I think it's a good idea to have a bunch of other metadata besides the resources, right? There's all kinds of examples. You can even think of, you know, here's the proof of possession mechanism I understand, right? For how it wants to talk to the resource. You know,
okay.
So that the, you know, so I agree with that. I don't think you could still have the label be the L value and have it be an object that has the metadata with resources in it. So I don't think that's an either or. And I'd second Yaron's comment about access token, because you could call it access and the thing coming back can be access that contains the access tokens.
Mm-hmm. So a quick note about the L value. The reason for not doing that is actually related to our next topic. And what that would effectively mean is that the L value, so if this is an object in both, if this is a JSON object for both the single and multiple access token cases, then we're running into a very sort of error-prone and potentially dangerous mode of using polymorphism in the protocol, because now we have two different objects with very different structures and very different semantics, which now need to be keyed on something internal to the object, which also means that I can never use resources or key or split or label or a number of other fields as token label values. So moving the labels internally and using an array allows us to differentiate things at a root level. So that's the motivation for moving it in that direction. Which is actually a good segue into the next issue of polymorphism in the protocol in general.
And let me just call time, especially if we're moving into polymorphism. We barely have some time to describe the issue, probably not for discussion.
Okay, that's totally fine. This is a bigger design issue. One of the things that the editors want to be clear here is that we're using a very specific kind of JSON polymorphism in the design of the current protocol. So JSON has no inherent type restrictions, which is why JSON schema and JSON LD and CDDL and all of these other things exist. It allows you to define that, because protocols, and especially security protocols, you want to have sort of strict expectations of what you're going to find within an array or in a given field or whatever. Polymorphism, as we are using it, allows each field to have expressions for different use cases. So like I was just talking about, if I see a JSON array here, that's one expression of the access that I'm looking for, versus a JSON object here, which is a different expression, but I'm still talking about the kind of access. And the important thing here is that those different options are naturally mutually exclusive because it's enforced in the JSON syntax itself, right? That's where this value really comes in. So this is one example of sort of string versus object polymorphism that we have today, where you can send this rich multidimensional object, or you can send a string, and the idea is that it references that. Now, here's the question: what do we do with it? If we're going to keep using it within the protocol, this has been brought up a number of times, use it only where it makes the most sense. Absolutely agree. We shouldn't just be peppering this everywhere just because we can. It needs to be very clearly and very sort of strictly defined. And there's been some great discussion on using an informative validation language. So JSON schema, CDDL, there's a bunch of others out there, and providing a test suite for people to run their messages against those schemas to figure out, you know, whether or not what they're doing actually complies. Wherever possible, we need to make sure that we are optimizing complexity away from the client software. But if that means that the AS has to bear more of the complexity burden, it's not necessarily a bad thing. And then, of course, if we decide that we don't want to use JSON polymorphism at all, we need to answer the question of how are we going to express this instead? There are, of course, lots of ways that we could express all of these different bits of syntax. Generally, though, we're going to end up doing things like mutual exclusivity of fields that has to get enforced, like, you know, at the application level. So if I see these two fields together, then that's an error. Or we have a type field within the object, which ironically we have in the resources array. So that is a different flavor of polymorphism within those objects, but that is also sort of tightly bound and defined just for that space. And there's a trade-off for doing that. Or we end up with things like a container object that is only allowed to have a mutually exclusive value. We've got that in at least one place in the protocol right now as an option. And we need to ask ourselves, is that the direction we want to go? Because each of these different approaches has different kinds of complexity, and we have to be aware of who pays for the complexity. So this is a core design issue. I think there's a lot more discussion that we need to have, and especially if we're going to be moving away, if we decide to move away from polymorphism, we need to have something to replace it with, and it needs to be something that actually improves things. That, you know, we need to know what the trade-offs are. That's all I had for slides. So I think we're good. Please comment on the issues. Please bring things up on the list. And thanks, everyone. And I'm not sure how to unshare my screen.
Well, I think
there it is.
Well, there you go.
No, I found it. Thank you.
All right.
Okay, so
I think that gets us back to start. You want to go back to chair stick?
No, we don't have any slides for this
All right.
part of the discussion. So the next few minutes, we're going to talk about next steps. And Leif and I discussed it, and we would like to have multiple, probably 2 interim meetings between now and the next full IETF. But this is a question to the group, and especially a question to the editorial team. Interims will help us to close issues and move work forward at a faster pace. But they impose a load on the editorial team. So is the number 2 interims too much, too little? What do people think? Or are we good enough with not having any interims and just doing the work on the mailing list? Aaron, please.
and Justin.
Personally, I'm a big fan of interim meetings. I feel like it helps make progress go faster and gives people more checkpoints. It also is more affordable for people to attend those since there is no obligation to pay the registration fee for IETF meetings. So I'm a big fan of that, and I think I would definitely be in support of more often meetings, interim meetings.
Justin.
Favor. Oh, there we are. I'm also in favor of interims for the reasons that Aaron's talking about. I think that they can be really good for moving discussion forward rapidly, with the caveat that any interim meetings needs to be very, very clearly scoped by the chairs to say, this is what we're talking about today, and make sure people don't rat hole on things. I think we did really well as a working group tonight in this format, in not rat holing on things and time boxing things. So that gives me some hope for us being able to continue to move forward in a positive way. So I'm in favor. I think at least 2 makes sense, maybe more. And one thing that I've seen the OAuth working group do is have it be topically driven. Like if there are a lot of discrete topics to talk about, schedule a bunch of different meetings.
Okay, so I suggest we move forward and schedule the next interim in about a month from now, and have the chairs, editors, and anybody else who wants to chime in discuss what topics we would like to cover at the meeting.
Of course, this is not licensed for doing nothing between now and then. So. All right, I guess that means that we're at open mic. Well, not seeing anybody rush to the microphone. That could be that we're tapped out for stuff to talk about right now.
Yeah, so this is your time to comment about process, but also about anything else we discussed today, or anything else the working group should be aware of. Justin?
Are we there? Yes. Okay. Sorry. So the editors have made a handful of changes to the document already, mostly pulling out the editor's notes and sort of collapsing that. Would it be beneficial, especially chairs, do you think it would be beneficial for us to publish a draft 02 with that change set going, forward? Because we've got that plus, a couple of typos fixed and dangling statements fixed. That's easy enough for me to publish this week, and it doesn't really have normative or substantive changes.
I would say yes. I think it would make it easier for people to review and jump into the relevant issues.
Okay, I will take an action to do that at some point this week.
Thank you.
Not right now because it's 2 a.m.
All right. 5 minutes left to go. We may maybe we'll just call this a little bit early. What do you think, Jerome?
One more thing. For those of us where it's not 2 a.m., there's the gather thing. I honestly don't remember what room we were supposed to be in, but if you want to meet there for a more informal discussion, that would be appreciated.
It's room 7, Adam says.
Room 7. Fabian?
Well, yeah, thank you. You just answered my question because the map is quite big, actually.
All right, so with that, we are done. Thank you, everyone, and we will let you know once we have the interim meeting scheduled. And in the meantime, please make best use of GitHub. We would like to know what you think about the various issues we discussed today. Thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of ITF.
Fabian was actually at the queue, so. Fabian, did you want to say something going out?
No, I had finished. Thank you very much.
Okay. And Roman, it sounded like you wanted to say something.
You and Euron for facilitating our meeting. Thanks much.
Indeed.
Thank you, Roman.
All right. That's it. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.